How's it going? Welcome to the channel. Welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time as a listener, thank you for joining us. If you're a reoccurring listener, thank you for joining us once again. If the subject and the contents of coaching, leadership, and team is something that you're passionate about and resonates with you, think this channel is a great fit, think this podcast is a great fit. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. Have a great day. How's it going? This is Keanu Yamamoto with the Coachers Podcast, in here with Coach Neil Russo, head wrestling coach for Newberg High School in Oregon. Coach, thanks for jumping on. Please tell us about your family, journey, background, all that good stuff.
Well, thanks for having me. I am the head coach here at Newberg High School. Been here since 1998. Took over for my uncle. Kind of took over for my dad. So it's been a family business for 55 plus years. 57, I believe, is the actual number. I grew up here in Newberg, graduated from Newberg High School. My kids went to Newberg High School. I have a son, Peter, and a daughter, Samantha, a couple of grandkids, and my wife, Dorothy, 35, going on 35 years. It's been a great journey, not quite over yet, but we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here and ready for that next phase.
Yeah. Talk to me about just kind of the why behind not only your father, your uncle, but and yourself, just as far as the why behind coaching and then, kind of passing that tradition down from one to another.
Yeah, I think when you grow up in a family of coaches and educators, I think you become drawn to it, just like anything else, I would imagine. I don't know that I ever had the intention of becoming a teacher or a coach for that matter, but that was the path that brought me here, obviously. I think I was an engineering student for about 5 minutes at Oregon State when I first went. I walked across the street to Education Hall and got into the education program. Wrestled there at Oregon State for Dale Thomas, who is the legend himself, the winningest college coach in NC2A history, I believe, wrestling anyways. He was the head coach for my first 3 years there. And, I learned a lot from him. Mark Johnson came in my last year, and I really credit Mark for kind of reinventing wrestling for me. It wasn't necessarily a positive experience with Dale. I learned a lot, but I really, and I tell people, I don't know that I would still be involved in wrestling had Mark not come in. It just gave me a new perspective. I did take a lot from Dale, but I went from Oregon State to Pendleton High School for 1 year. I was an assistant coach, taught social studies. It was a great experience. Dorothy and I got married in August, moved to Pendleton immediately. Our first introduction to Pendleton was the Pendleton Roundup, and things calmed down from there. We were there for 1 year. She taught sixth grade. I was at the high school, and then I went to Reynolds High School. I coached football and wrestling at Reynolds for 5 or 6 years, and then eventually came back here to Newberg.
You mentioned took over head coach in 1998. At what point throughout your career, and maybe you're not there yet, did you feel like, man, I got this figured out? This is who I am as a coach.
I don't know that I've ever had that revelation. I feel like I'm always developing and growing as a coach. I am not the same coach today that I was 30 years ago or even 10 years ago. And I think that's important. Kids are different, the sport is different, athletics are different for that matter. And I feel like I've tried to keep up with those changes and adapt my coaching style to that. When I came and I took over for my uncle, he still was teaching in the building and he didn't come in the wrestling room. And it took me a little while to figure out that he did that for my benefit. It wasn't that he didn't want to be in there. It was that he knew that in order for me to establish myself as the head coach, as the leader of the program, that he was going to have to disappear for a little bit. And he did for a full year. Then he came back and was there every day and helped us with some youth stuff and some middle school stuff and in the high school room. And so I think that helped quite a bit. And like I said, he did that intentionally. And I have come to appreciate that. At the time, I was a little bit confused about what was happening, but it was all for the best.
You mentioned, you're not the same coach from 10 years ago. You're not the same coach from 1998. Can you kind of talk about, how you adapted and how you switched up your coaching styles, and maybe, from a coach who's been doing it so long, what are the differences in the athletes and their mentality from 1998 to, where we are now in 2026?
Oh, I think there are a lot of differences, just society in general, and people my age can reflect on that. Kids have a lot. There's a lot going on. There's some information overload, if you will, distractions, all those things, but those things have always existed, just in different forms. I think, the idea of specialization at a young age is something that coaches have to deal with today. We have a lot of three-sport athletes, multi-sport athletes in our program. The perception from the outside, even from the community, is that if you're a wrestler at Newberg, that's all you do. And I'm proud to say that most of my wrestlers are multi-sport athletes. Not all of them. Some of them are wrestling specific. I think the three-sport athlete and the multi-sport athlete is not as common as it used to be. It also makes coaching wrestling a little more difficult. You used to be able to get a ninth grader to come out for wrestling. You talk to coaches my age, most of them probably coached football. And the primary reason was they were going to recruit wrestlers off of that football team, and they were going to come from the field into the wrestling room. And even if they hadn't wrestled before, if they were hard workers and fairly good athletes, by the time they were juniors and seniors, they were contributing to the program. That's becoming more and more difficult because kids are, like I said, specializing from such an early age. And I think one of the hardest things about coaching wrestling right now is it's hard to get kids with good athletic ability to come out for wrestling if they've never wrestled before. They've had success in other sports and other activities, and then they come into that wrestling room, and there are kids that they're literally running circles around in PE class, for example. But those kids have 4 or 5 years of wrestling experience, and they're taking those good athletes and putting it on them. And it's a little bit hard for those kids with that athletic ability who have had that success to start at ground zero and try to recover in that way.
No, that's a good answer, Coach. I've always, when I think of wrestling, I think of multi-sport athletes. I always think of, the benefits that wrestling can provide to a football player. The benefits that wrestling can provide to X sport. But you being in the midst of it, what are some of the benefits from other sports that help out on the wrestling mat?
Well, football specifically, and I tell kids all the time, we tackle every day. You come into the wrestling room and you're gonna learn how to tackle, right? And I have kids that play football, and their technique may not be the best. They're not stepping right with the right foot, but they're gonna get to the ball, and if they get their hands on you, you're getting tackled. I think, everybody knows, and I don't think it's a secret, wrestlers work hard. Wrestling practice is a grind, and you've got your hands on people. People have their hands on you. Physical contact. But I think the biggest benefit of wrestling is learning how to be uncomfortable. And not just the hard work, the daily grind, the practice, but everything. And I think sometimes we're our own worst enemy in the sport of wrestling. I had a parent tell me this one time. His boy wrestled for me and did a lot of wrestling, hard worker, great kid. But this guy couldn't figure out why we had to be uncomfortable all the time. The parent, not the kid. Says, you guys go out of your way to be uncomfortable. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, right? Everything from the uniform you're putting on and getting out in front of everybody to the practice, to weight management, the schedule that we keep. We're weighing in at 6:30 in the morning. That means we're getting up at 5 a.m. We're wrestling at 9, we're wrestling at 11, 1, 3, and then we're going to do it again tomorrow. Like I said, I think one of the biggest benefits is learning how to be uncomfortable, learning how to deal with discomfort, and working through it.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, one of the things that you're saying is, you're emphasizing putting people in uncomfortable situations and just kind of the overall growth and development of that person. And you mentioned earlier that wrestling is tough and it is a grind, right? So how do successful wrestling programs or wrestling programs just in general, how do they retain athletes? Like, hey, you're going to be put in uncomfortable situations. You're going to work the hardest that you worked in your life. Come and join me. That sounds like a great time. You know what I mean?
I do. I do. And it's the frog in boiling water, I guess, right? You put that frog into lukewarm water and you just slowly turn that heat up. And by the time it's boiling, it's too late, right? And so we have talked about that with our youth program. We work hard and we're not doing anything different than anybody else does, I don't think. I don't know. I've never been in anybody else's wrestling room, but we get young kids in there. We try to make it fun. We try to make it enjoyable. And we slowly turn that heat up as we go. And I can remember telling a group of coaches and parents that we have to get these kids to a point where we can do and say anything on Monday and they're going to come back on Tuesday. But you don't start that way. And, one of the things about wrestling is I think you get one chance with a kid. If he has a miserable experience, or she has a miserable experience, they're not coming back. And I hear that all the time. I talk to ninth grade kids. Hey, why don't you come out for wrestling? I tried it when I was young. I didn't like it. And I try to explain to them, well, there are probably a lot of things you didn't like when you were in the third grade, but things change. As opposed to baseball, for example, you take the kid to baseball practice, he gets hit in the head with the first pitch he ever sees. He's coming back tomorrow. But you take that kid on the wrestling mat and he gets a bloody nose and he gets beat up by a kid that's been in there for 4 years longer than he has, he's not coming back. And so I think the whole progression there is getting kids comfortable in the room and getting them to a point where they understand it is tough and that there is a satisfaction in doing something that other people can't, won't, or don't want to do.
Yeah. Well, that's a great answer, Coach. I had a discussion with a friend just the other day, and we're talking about coach pitch. His son's doing coach pitch, and we're going back and forth. And you just kind of brought it up as you were just speaking right there. Like, what is that turning point? What is that, as you referenced, that boiling point from, okay, we're going to keep this fun. We want this kid to come back. We want him to have a great experience. And then, okay, when does winning become relevant? And I guess if you could give me an age or you could give me like a spectrum, I just love your opinion on that.
Yeah, I can drop a whole bunch of coaching cliches right now. It's about the process. It's not about the results and all of those things. But at the end of the day, kids want to win. Coaches want to win. And society is set up in a way where that's what we recognize. We recognize winners. Everybody wants to get their hand raised at the end of the match or the end of the day or the end of the game or whatever it is. But we try to keep that perspective about the process for as long as possible. It should always be about the process. And winning, I think, becomes a byproduct of that. Wrestling is a little bit different in that sense, too. We can take these kids somewhere and get all of them beat. And that's one of my goals as a coach is we're going to learn how to lose. We don't want to get real good at it, but we're going to learn how to lose. We're going to learn how to learn from those losses and we're going to go forward. So I don't know that winning ever becomes the goal or the focus, but I think it becomes more of a product of that process.
Yeah. If
I
you
don't know
were
if
to
that really
describe,
answers your
no, it
question.
does. It does. It does. If you were to describe, your coaching philosophy, what's important to who you are as a coach and what's important to Newberg Wrestling, what would that be?
Again, it sounds cliche, but especially at the high school level, we want kids to learn lessons. We want them to learn life lessons that they take from our program. And we hope that we're teaching those lessons through wrestling, right? And so we talk about those things every day, before practice, after practice. We're going to work hard. We're going to be committed to each other. We're going to be kind. Rule number one in our program is be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And it sounds simple, but there are other levels to that. Actually, rule number one is don't touch my shit, but we don't repeat that out loud and the kids know that. But rule number one is be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And I think if you look around society, there are a lot of people that struggle with that real simple concept, being on time and doing what you're supposed to do. And if kids leave our program and have figured that part out, well, the rest of it kind of falls into place. Being kind to each other, being kind to other people, being kind to ourselves. That's something that we really, really work on. But we're working hard and we're trying to win at the same time. And I think that's the toughest part about coaching, right? Is you want to balance teaching those life lessons, but you also want to be competitive and you want to give your best effort every day.
Yeah. You coach state champions and you coach people in high school who might just be wrestling for the first time or picking it back up again after however many years. What's your approach to making both those wrestlers feel like they belong in the same room together?
Well, our expectations are the same for every kid, whether you have grown up in this wrestling room and have, you're a senior in our program, three-time state champion, looking for a fourth title, or you just wandered in here one day and you're not sure whether those mats are stuffed with feathers or pumped up with air every day. The expectations are the same. You're going to come, you're going to work hard, you're going to be on time, and you're going to give us your best effort. One of the things that we talk about is maxing out, being your very best. And you get to the end of the season and you've got qualifying events for the state tournament. And for some kids, maxing out is winning that state title. For other kids, qualifying for the state tournament is exceeding that max. And for some, even qualifying is not even on the table, but maxing out all the time. It's a little bit difficult in wrestling to measure that. Did you do your very best? Is that the best we could have gotten out of that event or that season or whatever it is? Things like track and swimming, I hear kids talk about, "Well, how'd you do today?" PR. Yeah, but what place did you get? But there is no PR in wrestling, right? So it's a little bit intangible to measure that, but that's what we're trying to get all the time is a little bit better every day and being our very best at the end of the season. And if that very best is winning a state title, then great. If it's winning a match at the district tournament, then that's great. And it's different for everybody, but the expectations are the same for everybody in the room. And I like to think, and I pride myself on the fact that I think we give the last guy on our roster, the last girl on our roster, a positive experience. It might not end with a title or even a win for that matter, but a positive experience. They feel like they belong. They feel like they're a part of what we're doing as a team. They feel like they're being coached and held to the same standards as that four-time state champion.
Yeah. Is there a moment within your wrestling career as a wrestler, as a coach, that still sticks with you today and kind of shapes how you are as a coach today?
I don't know if there's a singular moment. I have some great memories of competing and coaching, more coaching than competing. It's been like I said, it's been an evolution, right? When I started coaching, and I think everybody is the same, you coach how you were coached. And I was coached by my dad. I was coached by my uncle, Dale Thomas, Mark Johnson. And I tried to take a little bit from each one of them and make that my own. I don't know that we do anything, like I said before, I don't know that we do anything different than anyone else, but I think at the end of the day, coaching is an art, right? And you have to craft that to fit your personality and what you're trying to do. I have a coaching plan every day. I have a practice plan every day. Sometimes I even look at it. Sometimes I even follow it. But I think, you give two coaches the same practice plan, tell them to run that practice. The person that can make those adaptations, that can change course, is the artist, right? There are days where I have the greatest practice plan I've ever written, I think, and I walk in and we're warming up and it becomes real obvious to me this ain't happening today. And that practice plan gets thrown away and we go a different route. And like I said, not really a singular moment, but I think it's just been kind of an evolving, ongoing development of myself. And I like to think I'm still developing.
No, that's a good answer, Coach. Great insight there. I've never wrestled. My only experience with wrestling was I was a high school freshman. I was playing quarterback for the team. I was kind of cocky. Had a lot of friends that wrestled, so I ran my mouth one time, and I walked inside the wrestling room, and I got pinned by, I shit you not, 8 guys. And the wrestling coach, one of the assistant wrestling coaches, was the football strength coach, so he pinned me too. And that was the last time I stepped in on the weight in the wrestling room.
That's why I steer clear of quarterbacks. I just don't. No,
Yeah.
I've
No,
had some great quarterbacks.
we're soft now. We're soft now. But I just want to take a deeper dive and just get your perspective on this from a mentality standpoint. Like as a wrestler, when you were a wrestler, and from what your wrestlers experience right now. When you're in the match, is it you versus you or is it you versus the opponent? Like what does that dynamic look like?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Like, there's nothing more natural than wrestling, right? Like, you put 2 kids in a room and you put a book in there, and they're probably not gonna be reading to each other when you come back. They're gonna be wrestling, and that book's gonna be off to the side, right? It's primitive, it's personal. You know, I talk to parents, new wrestling parents. There's nothing more personal than wrestling. You go watch a kid play football, he's got a helmet on, he's got shoulder pads on, he's 50 yards away from you in the stands. But you go watch your kid wrestle, and you're 30 feet away, and it's just your kid and one other kid, and it's personal. And it's, like I said, primitive, but it's also cerebral. Right? There's a physical aspect to wrestling. There's no question about that. But I love the mental part of wrestling as well. Not just the mental toughness piece, but the strategy and mat management and time management and score management. I love coaching that part of wrestling as well. And to the uneducated wrestling fan, a 3-2 match is, I guess, boring for lack of a better word. To the educated wrestling fan, to the educated wrestling coach, it's beautiful, right? And I think it takes a little bit of perception to experience that and to appreciate it. But to me, that's the beauty of wrestling too.
Yeah. If I'm a if I am a first time TED wrestling coach and I call up Coach Neil Russo, what are the three things that you're going to tell me as far as how to keep this thing rolling or get this thing rolling?
Get them young, make it fun, get good help. I have good help around me. This community, it's a unique community. It's a wrestling community. I don't think there are very many places where if you're the head wrestling coach and your teams are mediocre, in most places it's not going to be a big deal. I like to think, and I know for a fact in Newberg, that's not going to be tolerated. I have kids in my program right now who I coach their parents. I have kids in my program right now who my uncle and my dad coached their grandparents. Those families are still involved in our wrestling community, and it's awesome. But there is a standard here that is expected to be met, right? And I tell people all the time, we had a little lull. We, like all programs, ups and downs and shortly after my son graduated, actually, we had a couple of, by our standards, by anyone's standards, horrible years. And a couple people, community people called me in and like, hey, this is not acceptable here at Newberg High School. And I said, yeah, but listen, mom, listen, dad, I'm trying to get this thing back on track. And people laugh at that. We did get it back on track, but we sat down and we got community members involved. We got some youth parents involved, and we had some conversations about where this program needed to go. And those are the things that we talked about. We've got to get people in young. We've got to get parents to buy into what we're doing. And we have to create an atmosphere that kids want to come back to. And we have to get to the point where parents are supporting what we're doing. We're going to help them parent. We don't need their help coaching, but we want them in so deep that they can't get out. And that group went on a pretty good heater for us for about 10 years.
Let's think in season. What does the layout, if you could give just kind of a brief overview just of the layout of the week in season?
Well, when we're competing, it's tough. Our schedule in wrestling, you're usually wrestling a league dual meet on Wednesday or Thursday night, and 2 out of every 3 weekends, you're wrestling Friday and Saturday. And when I was in high school, for example, we wrestled 20, the limit was 28 individual matches. And I don't know that we ever got close to that. Today, the limit is 50 individual matches. Kids are coming into high school programs with literally thousands of youth matches. So the practice room, I think, has changed in the last 30 years. And I have kids come in all the time that were in our program 20 years ago or 15 years ago. Oh man, you don't work them nearly as hard as you worked us. We don't wrestle live in the wrestling room very often at all. Partly because, like I said, kids are wrestling 45, 50 matches over the course of the year. We're wrestling 5 or 6, 7 matches a week. So in that practice room, it's a lot of drilling. It's a lot of technique. It's a lot of review of, all right, we wrestled last week. These are the things that we saw. Let's address these. But for the most part, we stay the course and we're pretty consistent in the practice room. We warm up the same way, a little bit of instruction, a lot of drilling. We try to hit every position every day. Um, and like I said, very, very little live combat in the room. And when there is live combat, it's usually from a specific position. We start them in a particular spot, wrestle through that, and then move on from there.
Yeah. If I were to come and watch a practice, or if another wrestling coach came and watch a practice, what do you want them to take away from that practice as far as just the identity of the program?
Efficiency. I don't like to waste time in the practice room. You can count on one hand the number of times we've practiced for more than 2 hours. We don't waste time.
Is that standard? Like what's a standard wrestling practice usually?
Yeah, we 2 hours, 3:30
Yeah.
to 5:30, where we are right now, just based on when we get out of school during the day. As the season goes on, generally practices get a little bit shorter, but never more than 2 hours, almost never more than 2 hours. But efficient. I like to believe that there is never any question about what should be happening right now. I watched other practices. We go to clinics, go to camps. It drives me nuts when kids are standing around wondering what we're supposed to be doing right now. And so I like to think that there's never any question about what should be happening in our practice room.
Yeah, no, it's a good answer. I just looked at the OSAA, and at least just for boys. I didn't check the girls' side, and I could be mistaken here. 6 state championships. Is that correct for the boys? Or is it more?
I think it's 6
Yeah,
plus a COVID
gotcha,
one that
gotcha.
the OSAA washed their hands of, but that's
Okay,
their.
regardless, 6 state titles right now for boys. But what are you most proud of as a coach?
As a coach, I think the relationship that I have with kids that have gone through this program. You can see behind me here. I'm in my office right now. Around the top of the room are pictures of all of the state champions that I have coached, actually. But it hasn't really been about that. There have been thousands of kids go through our wrestling room in the last 30 years. And I'm not in contact with all of them. I'm in contact with a lot of them. I love having kids come back and share with us the lessons and the values that they took away from our program and how they are helping them outside of wrestling. And I tell our kids every day, like, most of you are not going to wrestle beyond high school. We're working on wrestling stuff in here. I hope you never need that double leg as an adult, but learning how to show up on time, learning how to work hard, learning how to deal with adversity, learning how to be uncomfortable. Those are the things that we want you to take from this program. And I think we've done a very good job of instilling those values in kids that have come through our program.
What is a drill or workout or conditioning that your players dislike, but you do it anyways because you know it's going to be beneficial for them?
Oh, man, I had a kid, maybe the best character I've ever coached, and he was one of the best athletes I ever coached, 3-time state champion. When he was a freshman, he brought me a list of the 5 worst drills that we do and said we should never do these again. And I don't think anybody's surprised, but we did all 5 of them for the next 10 days, and that's all we did in the room. There are a few that I know kids don't like, and they are valuable, they are necessary. Sometimes I go out of my way to infuse them into practice because I know kids don't like them. Lift and return, mat returns, kids don't like to drill that. They don't mind lifting and returning when they're fresh and not tired. But when you're tired, lifting another human that's about your size and returning to them to the mat is exhausting. Not quite as exhausting as being the one that is getting lifted and returned and has to stand back up every time. They hate that drill. We do it sparingly, but we do it. But I still have that list of those 5 drills, and I pull it out every once in a while and send him a picture of it.
That's awesome. Why is the sport of wrestling the greatest sport in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a great balance of the importance of team and the individual aspect. You can be an outstanding individual. You can build an incredible wrestling resume, regardless of the success of that team. But you can also be an average or even less than average wrestler, athlete, and be a part of team success. And I don't think that's unique to wrestling, but because of the individual status, technically it's an individual sport. We like to say that we have turned wrestling into a team sport at Newberg High School, that the team is the most important part of that. And I think that's one of the most satisfying things for me is that we have gotten kids to buy into, while their individual success is important, they are willing to give up some of that if it means it's going to help the team. So we have kids go up a weight. We have kids go down a weight for that matter, not very often, but we have kids who are willing to do whatever it takes to help the team be better. And in some cases, that means giving up some of those individual accolades. And I already touched on it. I think learning to be uncomfortable is one of the biggest benefits of wrestling.
Yeah. If you could coach any wrestler, past or present, who would it be and why?
Full disclosure to your listeners, that is in the script that you sent me, and that one whipped me, but I think I figured it out. I would like to coach myself. I'm not sure why, but I'd like to see how I handled myself as an athlete, knowing what I know now about coaching and the idea that, not every kid is the same, and trying to find that one avenue that gets to that one kid. I would like the challenge of coaching myself.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. You're the second coach that's mentioned that, and I think when people mention that, I don't know, I just think it's unique. To follow up, do you think you would like yourself as a coach? If you could turn back the clock to where your mindset was when you were 16, 17.
I would like to think I would. Yes, I am fluent in sarcasm. I love humor. All of the best coaches I've ever been around have incredible sense of humor, and I think that's important. I like to infuse humor. I like it at a high level. I like it when it goes over about 90% of the kids in the room's head, and the 10% that get it are nodding and smiling. I would have appreciated myself for that particular reason.
Yeah.
I don't know that me 30 years ago would have been a good coach for me 40 years ago. I think I would appreciate me today.
Yeah, that's good stuff, Coach. Gave you a heads up beforehand. The Anela question a day. My daughter gets to ask a question for the guest, and her question was, "What is your favorite food?"
I am partial to Italian food, specifically ravioli. When I was a kid, my grandmother made homemade ravioli. I have not been able to find anything close to it. I've tried making it myself. I've tried every frozen brand, fresh brand, but I love Italian and I love ravioli specifically.
What does the word team mean to you?
Everyone pulling in the same direction. Wrestling is unique in how it is scored, and the difference between dual meets and tournament scoring. Everyone can contribute. In a dual meet, you earn team points based on those individual matches. 14 matches in a dual meet. You win by fall, 16 points. You win by a major decision, 14 points. Regular decision, 3 team points. And so we talk about you can contribute, you're maybe not winning, but you can spoil somebody's major decision. You score at the end of the match, and instead of it being an 8-point margin, it's a 7-point margin, saves us a team point. The other team gets 3 instead of 4. And recognizing that everyone can contribute. You're not in the lineup, but you're in the practice room every day. Your responsibility is to give your best effort and help everybody around you get better. Doing all the things that we expect and buying into what we're doing.
Can you kind of talk about just the role or your approach with a wrestler? Okay, what is your role during the pre-match? Like when I'm thinking pre-game, I'm thinking football. I'm thinking the head coach comes in, addresses the team, whoop-de-whoop. So what is your role pre-match? And then kind of talk about your role and significance during the match.
Pre-match, a lot of that depends on the group that we have at any given time, right? I've had groups where I felt like I don't know if this is the right term. I felt like I had to basically micromanage that group. Everything from, all right, we're putting our shoes on now. We're going to warm up. This is what we're doing to warm up. I've got a clock. I've got a whistle. And I'm going to make sure everybody's ready to go. There are some groups where I don't even go in the room when they're warming up. I tell them, hey, we're starting at 7. That warm up needs to start around 6 o'clock. Make sure you're ready to go when you come out. I go out, they're ready to go. I walk them over and we go fight. So I think a lot of that depends on the group that you have and the leadership that you have in that group. And there are some individuals that need something different, right? There are kids that they need a 45-minute full blow. You got to be kidding me. How can you have any energy left when you're done? And I have kids that need to lay down and take a nap before that. Whatever it takes for you to be ready to step on the mat. And I tell them all the time, you're in charge of your warm up, but when I feel like it didn't get done the right way, then I'm going to take over. They don't want me to take over, so they generally take care of that themselves.
How do you go about, if you have a wrestler who's in a slump or just experienced, a couple losses that, he felt that he should have won, kind of talk about maybe your approach and how you engage that athlete.
Yeah, wrestling is so humbling. Everybody gets beat, and we want to take those losses, turn them into the learning opportunities. But yeah, it's like anything else. You got to find something positive that we can take from those losses and have a short memory. And we go to events where whether it's a team event or an individual event, you're going to be up again in an hour. That match is over. We've got to flush that. There are some things that we need to address, and most of the time, those things aren't going to be addressed right then, right there. There's something we have to get back to the room and work on, talk about, look at. It's like any other sport, right? You're not doing a whole lot of fixing on the sideline, but like I said, I just flush it, move on, and get better from it.
Yeah. Obviously a lot of great teams throughout your tenure. What do you think was the separator between, the good teams, the really good teams, but then your state championship teams?
Luck had a lot to do with it. There are so many factors in that state tournament. Everything from the draws to the schedule and all of those things. But I think when we have had groups that owned what they were doing, it wasn't about it being important to anyone else. It wasn't about what other teams were doing, what other athletes were doing, just focused on themselves and being their very best. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, the recognition that not everybody's going to win a state title. There are 14 weight classes. There are 14 people that are going to walk out of this tournament that feel really, really good about themselves. But getting fifth in the state tournament and contributing to the team effort is every bit as important. And I think when we've had those groups that bought into that, I think that has been that tipping point, if you will.
Yeah. You mentioned when I asked you the question about, what were the 3 things you would tell me if I just took over as head coach, and the one thing you said, or the first thing you said was get them young, right? So what is that, for lack of a better term, recruiting pitch look like, to parents within the community of, hey, come out and do something uncomfortable, probably not going to be enjoyable, but this will be very beneficial for you. What does that recruiting pitch look like?
Well, I don't bring out the uncomfortable part or the unenjoyable part. We keep that in the bag for a while. They figure that out on their own. We do a little camp every fall where we get new wrestlers into our room for an hour, hour and a half, 3 or 4 nights that first week. And the whole idea is to get comfortable in that wrestling room. And I tell parents, look, they're not going to learn any wrestling, not this week. All I can guarantee is we're going to send them home tired and they're going to want to come back tomorrow. And I think that's the biggest thing, is making it fun for kids and slowly infusing that wrestling part in there. You want to be an athlete, we're going to learn body control. We're going to learn how to get taken down. We're going to learn how to take other people down. We're going to learn how to land. We're going to learn how to get our nose bent every once in a while, and we're probably going to be okay with it. And I think that's appealing to a lot of people, getting their kids just active.
How do you establish a sense of shared leadership within the team, and if you can kind of talk about your captain process, if you guys have a captain process, and what that looks like.
We have a captain process. We don't have captains, permanent. So in wrestling dual meets, there is a coin flip before the dual meet, and 90% of the people that watch a wrestling dual meet have no idea what that coin flip is about, but they flip the coin. The one team gets the choice in the odd numbered matches going into the second round, up, down, neutral, or defer the choice. And the other team gets the choice in the even numbered matches. It also determines who has to put their wrestler on the mat first, odd or even. And it's usually insignificant. There are 14 weight classes, so there are the same number of odd and same number of anyway. If you're the captain, you go out for that coin flip. We start at the bottom of the weight line, so the smallest weight class is 106. So at the start of the year, the 106-pounder is the captain. He goes out and he gets to be the captain until he loses the coin flip, and then he's fired, and we move our way up the weight line. And if you watch our kids on the bench, they are rooting for whoever is out there to lose that coin flip, because the only way we're ever going to get to them is if they do lose that coin flip and we move our way up the weight line. So specifically and technically, the captain piece is taken care of that way. But back to what you were asking about, leadership is what we're talking about. Again, we don't really have team captains. I think our philosophy is we're trying to develop a team and a program full of leaders where the expectations are the same for everybody, but there are always those kids who are natural leaders. There are kids who are quiet leaders. They just do the right things all the time. And I try to go out of my way to recognize when that is happening and to point that out. You also have some vocal leaders who everyone knows that what they are doing and how they are doing it. And that's great too. But I think when you can get everybody buying into that, you're developing a whole group of leaders. But there are generally 3, 4 kids who have that wrestling resume, who have that aura about them, if you will, that, all right, whatever that guy is doing, that's what we should all be doing.
Yeah.
And usually that kind of works itself out.
Yeah, I want you to think of a anecdote or an athlete that you had throughout the years, and the reference I'm using is Rudy here. Maybe someone who started off, didn't belong, and ended up, maxing by the end of their career.
Yeah, I've had a lot of them. Kids that came out as ninth graders or even middle school wrestlers that were with us for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and um they struggled, maybe struggled in the practice room, maybe struggled in competition, didn't have a whole lot of winning necessarily. But I feel like kids that buy into what we're doing generally develop to that point where they are contributors. Like I said, we had a group, they graduated 5 or 6 years ago. I got them when they were 8, 9, 10 years old. It was about 14 kids. They were all the same size. And as they progressed through our program, we didn't lose any of them. They were football players, they were baseball players, track athletes, they did other things, but they kept coming back to wrestling. Some of them became full-time wrestlers. They're wrestling in college right now. Some of them remained those three-sport athletes, and some of them are college athletes in other sports. But over the course of those 6, 8 years, they all spread out. We covered 13 of the 14 weight classes with those kids. And that goes back to a little bit of the luck that I was talking about, right? Like at one point, they were all within 5 or 6 pounds of each other, which was great. They were workout partners. They wrestled each other all the time. But by the time they were seniors in high school, they covered the whole weight line. And some of them had very little success as youth wrestlers. But we put a couple of kids in the state finals that year that you never would have guessed that was going to be the case. But I also think it goes back to that team piece, right? You've got these 14 kids, these 13 in a row in the weight line. Nobody wants to be that weak link. And so that expectation helps them rise up and become a part of that. It was a great experience. But the rags to riches, the Rudy story, there have been a few, but there have been quite a few actually.
Yeah,
And that's super enjoyable as a coach.
yeah. What is a what is a drill that you do now that you wish you did when you first took over the Newberg program?
This wrestling people will understand this. We start practice every day with what we call crab and roll. And one wrestler gets on top, the other one's on the bottom. We get in what we call a crab ride position and we just roll around. There's no set anything to it, but we're learning how to stay on top. It's hard work on the bottom. It's wrestling specific, but it's not really a technique that we do. But it I think it has improved our wrestling on the mat. It is a great warm up. It automatically has kids paired up in the room. So one of the things that used to drive me nuts was we'd spend 5 minutes kids looking for their partner for that day. This takes care of it immediately. So that's off the table. And I think it has improved our feel on top and our feel on the mat. And it's something we've been doing for 7, 8 years now. Every kid in our program knows that that's how we're going to start practice every day.
Yeah. Aside from winning, what other metrics do you use to define success as a coach?
I think we touched on a lot of them, right? I think kids having a positive experience. I think high school athletics specifically should be about those positive experience, learning those values that are going to help you going forward in life. Having kids recognize that mm, they're probably not going to take this wrestling with them forward, but they're going to take those other things that are going to help them in the workforce, in relationships, in whatever else they're going to be doing going forward. It's hard to measure that. It's easy to measure winning and losing. It's easy to measure the number of titles and what have you. But I don't think that's what it should be about. Uh, you know, we have some high school programs that it's all about getting kids to compete at the college level, and I really don't believe that is the end game in high school athletics either. It's about those relationships that kids build with one another, with their coaches, with the people that are leading them, and it's about those lessons that they're learning. Yes, some of them are going to go on and compete at a higher level, and that's great. But like I said before, I pride myself and we pride ourselves on the idea that every kid in our program is getting a positive experience if they want it, if they're willing to show up every day and do the work. And regardless of your talent, regardless of your accomplishments as a wrestler, you're going to get coached, you're going to get loved, you're going to get held accountable. You're probably going to get yelled at, but you're going to get treated like everybody else.
Any final? Sorry, go ahead.
We had a probably the best team we ever had. We were 2 deep in every weight, 28. We were actually 2 deep in every weight but one.
Are you talking this year, 2026?
No, this was 4 or 5 years ago, and we had a kid come out, and he just happened to be the right size. He had never wrestled before, had never participated in athletics. So he became our second 120-pounder, I think it was, and we had 27 kids that were pretty darn good. I think we had 21 on the podium that year in the state tournament. But this kid just happened to fill a spot. My core group that year decided they were gonna shave their heads or buzz their heads, and most of them bought in, but this kid that was new had long hair, and they were putting a little pressure on him to get his hair cut, and he kept saying no, and finally I had to call one of my leaders in and say, listen, that's the last thing I need is the front page of the newspaper. Somebody's getting their haircut that doesn't want their hair. Okay, yeah, okay. The very next day I walk into the room and that kid I talked to is chasing the long-haired kid with the clippers, literally chasing him across the mat. And I went nuts. I yank him into my office. What are you doing? What do you mean? I said, I told you we're not cutting anybody's hair that doesn't want their hair cut. He goes, yeah, I know. I said, well, what the hell are you doing chasing him with the clippers? He said, well, coach, you told us that everybody needs to feel like they belong. And we're putting a lot of pressure on Aiden. Aiden was a 3-time state champion, going to be a 4-time state champion, wouldn't get his hair cut either. And so we bug him every day. If we don't bug this guy, he's not going to feel like we care. And I just looked at him and said, that is the only answer you could give me right now. But if you touch that kid, I'm going to go nuts.
That's good.
That to me was kind of a defining moment in that group that they got it. They got that everybody was important and everybody needs to be valued. The kid couldn't wrestle his way out of a wet sack, but he was going to feel like he was every bit as important, and he needs to get his haircut like everybody else.
That's good
He
stuff,
didn't get
Coach.
his haircut either.
Yeah. Any final advice on coaching, teaching, leadership for the good of the community?
I don't know. I love coaching, and like I said, I think it's an art, and I've been doing it a long time. And I tell people all the time, if you coach long enough, you're going to have four scenarios. One, you're going to win with kids that you don't necessarily like being around, but you can only win that way for so long. You can have great kids and not win, and you can enjoy yourself, but only for so long. You can have kids you don't like being around and be horrible. There is nothing worse in coaching than that scenario. But if you do it long enough and you get the opportunity to win with great kids, there is nothing better. And I've had all of those scenarios, but in the last 10 or 12 years, we have been winning with great kids, and it is the most enjoyable thing that I have had the opportunity to experience.
That's a great answer, Coach. I love how you broke that down because I think that's transferable across every sport.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, Coach. Thanks again for your insight. I'll text you on the side, but if there's a picture that you want to use for the episode cover, just shoot me a text. If not, I will just pull one from the internet. All right, partner. Thanks for your time, man. Thanks, Coach. I'll see you.